Give me a minute. Okay. Somebody playing a trick on me? This happened one time. I'm missing 2 pages out of the middle. Huh? Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. I can do it without, but I'm going to pick up in the middle, and I'm not real sure what happened here. I really don't know. I don't. Oh, that would be nice. But I'm still missing a page. I'm still missing a page of notes, I think. Okay, let's just get started, okay? Let's pick up the reading with verse 9. Verse 9. Okay, Revelation chapter 17, verse 9. I'm going to go ahead and tell you. I'm going to cover chapter 18 like Sherman went through Georgia. Oh, I'm sorry, Laura, you're from Georgia. Let me not say it that way. Okay, let me say it a different way. I had a Greek professor in seminary. His name was Tom Urry, and they called him Hurry Urry, and I couldn't understand why. We were doing fine, going through. And at the end of the semester, with like 2 weeks at the end of the semester, we'd cover about a chapter a week, maybe sometimes less. At the end of the semester, we covered 3 chapters and had a final exam. Now I knew why they call him Hurry Urry. So I'm going to do that in chapter 18. All right, let's read, beginning with verse 9 through the end of the chapter, if you will, with me, and let's go from there. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. This is the great harlot, by the way, if you want to pick up. And they are 7 kings, or rulers. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. And the beast which was and is not, and is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. Now that's very confusing. I'll come back to it. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not received the kingdom, but they received authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have but one purpose. They give their power and authority to the beast. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are the called and chosen and faithful. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits, that goes back to verse 1, where she sits on many waters, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Now you know why I interpreted it that way. And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot. They'll turn on her, basically. And they will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God should be fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is the great city. Notice, the great city, which reigns over the kings of the earth. Okay, simply put, I may need a little bit more light, Drew. I'm missing 1 light right here. Simply put, the 7 heads of the beast symbolize one thing. I want you to do this for a moment. Don't get, it's that light right there. That's good, that's good, that's good. Don't get caught up in numbers here. In the Bible, numbers are often symbolic. We know that. People get caught up in the numbers. Okay, number 1 is this, number 2 is this, and that's where everything goes off. The 7 heads of the beast symbolizes one thing. It symbolizes the fullness of the beast, deception, blasphemy, and evil. This is a perfectly evil and blasphemous beast. It's much like our term that we would use, the 7 seas. You remember history talking about cruising the 7 seas. What are they talking about? They're talking about the seas of the world, all the seas of the world combined. There are more than 7 seas, if you include the Gulfs and all that kind of stuff. But it was a term that was used all-inclusive. The seven heads symbolically represent the complete and the full source of evil power and blasphemy. The reference to successive kingdoms here, the seven and then the 10. There are a lot of people think these are the Roman emperors, and they started with this one, ended with this one, or the kingdoms that even began before that, and even go after the Roman Empire. Guys, it's nice to have the benefit of history, look back through here at Scripture and say, all that's been fulfilled. But that is not the purpose that John has in mind. The imagery here of the seven heads presented goes back to chapters 12 and 13. And so we must interpret the imagery here in the light of the way that we already interpreted chapters 12 and 13. And I'll just say it this way. If you go back to chapter 13, the ancient seal showing the seven-headed chaos monster back in chapter 13 being slain illustrates John's imagery here that we have in the verses that we just read. In that ancient scene, the monster is being slain by the progressive killing of the seven heads. 4 of the heads are killed apparently by a spear of a divine figure who is attacking this particular monster. The defeat seems imminent, yet the chaos monster is still had because 3 heads still live. In the same way, John's message is that 5 of the monster's 7 heads are already been killed off by the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and through the identification of the martyrs of Jesus by their own deaths. So only 2 heads remain. That's where I want you to get at this point. 1 head is now active, which we live in this world. We know that is true, showing the reality of the beast, contemporary earthly agents who will continue to afflict the saints, that's you and me. 1 head remains, indicating that there is still a battle to be fought, which we will get to when we get to chapter 19 and following, but that will bring about the end of the contemporary agents of the beast. The last manifestation of the beast's blasphemous power, we're told, will be very short. It will be, quote, a little while, the Scripture tells us. This statement goes with the function of the 10 horns, or kings, or better yet, their rulers, earthly rulers primarily, who, for verse 12 says, note this, will rule for 1 hour with the beast. The 7th king, or the 7th head, represents the final short display of satanic power and evil before the divine blow falls upon this beast. Now, verse 11 presents commentators and interpreters with a great deal of difficulty, and I've read through all that stuff. I've read through all the interpretations. I am not going to bore you with the different interpretations of why it's this, and I'm just going to try to sum it up. That's why I'm trying to stay close to my notes. There is no agreement. Note this. We talk about a 7th head, and then we're talking about an 8th one. That's where the confusion comes. There's no agreement as to whether the 7th or the 8th king is the Antichrist, but it must be admitted that any hypothesis or interpretation of the succession of kings or kingdom is founded upon verse 11. Here's the point. What John has in mind is a qualitative, not a quantitative, not number, but rather it's something more specific. In other words, he's thinking theologically not historically. He's not thinking politically like some political entity, which gives us further insight into the imagery and identification of the beast. Now, we note the strange manner here, at least strange to us, in which the sequence of the 7 kings gives way to the 8th, who is really the whole beast. Now, this is an imagery that the early church, and you have to remember that copies were made of the vision of Revelation, passed out to the churches. They were read by the pastor or some other church leader in the churches, and they were read. And so people are reading this, and they hear these images that they can readily understand. And that is the key to interpreting Revelation. The people in that day, how did they understand this? And they could understand this imagery, and here's why. The 8th day, by the way, was the day of resurrection of Christ, Sunday. It was also the beginning of the new week. Okay? The seventh day, that is the Jewish Sabbath, is held over to be replaced by the first of a new series, mainly Sunday. The eighth day was regarded as the day of the Messiah, the day of the new age, the sign of victory over the forces of evil. That is the eighth day. Some people call it the eighth day of creation. In a sense, there is an eighth day of creation. When that which is fallen in creation has become the eighth day. Now, you have to look at that verse in its original language, and that's why there's so much misunderstanding. And so the seventh beast is really the eighth beast. It's really the same figure, but it's taken to its extension. This provides a key to the symbolism of this chaos monster, and one of the three stages of the beast. Now, here are the three stages. These terms are given to us several times. He was, is not, will come. Of the three stages, only the last one, will come, is identified with him coming out of the abyss back in chapter 8. These words appear to be the equivalent of the beast's healed wound. It makes him so popular and to deceive people back in chapter 13. On the one hand, Christ has killed the monster by his death, and for believers, he is not. In the sense, he has no power over us now. Christ has killed this monster. He is not, and he has no power. Yet on the other hand, this beast still has life. One is, that is, one head still remains in verse 10, and will attempt one final battle against the Lamb and his followers. The other has not yet come, Scripture says here. He must remain for a little while, because we all know that after Jesus comes, there's a final climactic battle. Okay? You remember that? Well, we'll get to it when we get to chapter 19, okay? In order for him then, this beast, to recruit as many as he can to his side, the beast will then imitate, we've been over this ground before, he will imitate the resurrection of Christ by his healed wound. It looked like he was dead. Now he's come back to life. He will give the appearance in doing so that he is in full control, and he is alive, and he's in control of the world. He's the one to look to. And John quickly, though, gives special comfort here to God's people, that the beast belongs to the seventh, in the sense that he really is not the beginning of a new era, but rather he is part of the seven-headed monster who's already been slain by Christ, and therefore he will go to his deserved destruction. These dynamics reveal then the final mystery of the beast and the satanic deception, so that every Christian will be forewarned, and if we are forewarned, we will be forearmed. Okay? Which brings us to verses 12 through 14. The 10 horns. What are the 10 horns? The 10 horns, let me just do it this way. The 10 horns are rulers, or are identified with the same thing as kings. Now, this allusion goes back to, and you can read the Old Testament background for it, to Daniel chapter 7, specifically, if you want to write this down, verses 7 and 24. The number 10 is one of those other numbers that should be interpreted symbolically. 10 symbolizes a repeated number of times of an indefinite number. It's perhaps another number like 7 indicating fullness. Thus, the number should not be understood to refer specifically to 10 kings, or in a lot of interpreters, 10 successive kingdoms, but indicating multiple sovereign kingdoms in a confederacy that has but one purpose: to enhance the power of the beast. Or let me put it to you in clear terms. This is already going on, has been going on since the ascension of Jesus. Satan's job, his main goal, is to encourage and to draw in rulers and earthly authorities to his side to do one thing: persecute God's people and to deceive people and take them further away from God. And he will recruit any earthly power he can to do that. And that's what these 10 kings represent, or these 10 horns represent. They represent earthly powers co-opted by the beast to serve his purpose so that he can deceive people who may be Christian from continuing to follow Christ, deceive people not to go to Christ, and to deceive people to persecute the followers of Christ. And so, since these kings enter into a power conflict with the Lamb and his followers, that's what verse 14 tells us. The kind of sovereignty they exercise is going to be very much different than the kind of sovereignty that which the Lamb and his followers will exercise. It will be the antithesis. If you can imagine what the Messianic kingdom is going to be like when we get over to chapters 19 and following, especially chapter 20, the Messianic kingdom, the perfect reign of Christ, where everything is at peace and his followers reign with him. Imagine the antithesis of that. That is the rule of the beast with the rulers of the earth. Absolute chaos and absolute terrible things. Now these rulers, as well as with the beast with which they may be allied, can be no other than what we've talked about for the last several Sundays from Ephesians chapter 6. They're the principalities, powers, the authorities, the rulers, the spiritual forces of darkness, the wickedness in the heavenly realms. To be sure, don't misunderstand this, they are earthly instruments at the same time. But behind it is a deeper and greater historical manifestation. There is always behind this kind of thing something else going on. You can call it spiritual warfare. We can call it the beast, Satan, getting behind, deceiving, blaspheming, getting people to move away from God toward him, because that is his role in the world. These kings then embody the fullness of Satan's attacks against the Lamb and against the followers of Jesus in a final end times showdown that we will get to starting in a couple of weeks. They also, these kings, these horns, are the kings from the east mentioned back in chapter 16. They ally themselves with the beast in the final confrontation with the Lamb. When we get to chapter 19, when we get to that confrontation, there is a link between verses 11 and 12. Go back to those two verses. The 10 kings are said to receive authority for how long? 1 hour, along with the beast. This corresponds to the, open quote, little while that we were told about the 7th king in verse 10. From our viewpoint as believers who will be greatly persecuted, this brevity brings us great comfort. It won't be as long as we think it will be. The kings have but one purpose. They agree to oppose the Lamb. That is their purpose. They agree to oppose the Lamb. But the Lamb, the word here tells us, we just read, will conquer, because he is Lord of Lords, and again he is called King of Kings. In the same context that kings are talked about, he is the conqueror. He conquers by his death, and all those who follow him aid in his conquering because they follow him even to their own deaths, meaning the willingness to be martyrs. Which brings us down to verses 15 and the last part of the chapter. Verse 15 teaches one thing, that the influence of the idolatrous, satanic system of Babylon, the great harlot, the great city, is universal, embraces all people, from the humblest to the leaders of the world, to the captains of industry, to those that people look up to, from those of the humblest, let's think about, to those that Mother Teresa and now her Sisters of Charity still minister to. The least of the least of the least in Calcutta. Probably the most humblest, poorest, dirtiest, have-nothing people, to the leaders of the world, the people at the top. That is their role here. verse 15 teaches the influence of this idolatrous system of Babylon, from the low to the high. Verse 16 and 17, which pictures the attack of the prostitutes, interesting here, which indicates the final judgment of the kingdom of Satan. And this judgment, by divine purpose, will indicate that they'll turn on each other. The kingdom of Satan itself will be divided. Remember one thing. Wherever there is division, if you want to know why there's division in the Middle East, it isn't religion. It isn't. Do you know why there's division in America? It isn't politics. It isn't because these people are Republican, these people are Democrat, and these people are idiots, or these people are not. It isn't. It isn't because these people are from this state, or these people are from this region of the country, and these people are not. The reason there's polarization, there is division, everything else, is because that is how Satan best works. His most effective weapon is division. And whenever you see division, you see the work of the enemy. Think about it. How many, I'm a sports guy. I like sports. Even if you don't like sports, you know this. I don't know of any successful team. I mean, there have been a couple in some sports that have won with a lot of dissension and division on the team. Once. They might have won one year, but consistently, never happened. The best teams are those who are, and you hear this word sometimes from these teams, who are like family. They get along. They like each other. There's not division. Same is true with the best churches. Where division begins to creep in and divide people, put some people over here on this side, some people over here on this side, for whatever reason, there is the work of the enemy. It's his best ploy. It really is. I mean, what is it people can't talk about in polite company? There are two things people can't talk about in polite company. What is it? Why? Because we're always going to be hopelessly divided on those things. Why? Because we all have opinions. There's nothing wrong with that. But because behind our opinions is this divisive force. We need to understand where this divisive force is. And so, verses 16 and 17 tell us that even this great harlot's, this great prostitute's former lovers will turn on her, strip her naked, burn her in fire. Well, all of these things, this imagery, is reminiscent of Old Testament prophecies of divine judgment that fell or will fall upon the great harlot Jerusalem when she was pictured that way in the city of Tyre. And there's also a description in the Old Testament of the punishment of convicted prostitutes who were actually priest daughters. And these two pictures are combined here with a picture of judgment on rebellious cities. Then we have this declaration in verse 17. Anybody want to read it? Somebody read verse 17 again. Just read it right now. Okay, this is another indication. If you remember your Old Testament, who did God use? I'm going to run out of time. Who did God use as instruments of judgment against the people of God, the nation of Israel, when they turned against him? Did he use a more godly nation? No. First of all, the first true conqueror of the nation of Israel after David and after the kingdom fell apart was who? Who was the first conqueror? Babylon. Or maybe the Assyrian Empire. Huh? What? Assyria. Which was, they're all from the same area. But the point is they were very pagan nations. There was a succession of them. The Assyrians, the Babylons, I'm probably leaving somebody out. Then Then there were the Medes, Persians. Isn't it interesting? God doesn't use a more godly people to be his instruments of judgment against his people. He uses a pagan people. That is exactly what is going on here. The instruments of his divine judgments here upon evil, upon the beast, upon the great harlot, upon the city, are also going to be the same people who have followed this individual and who followed this deception, who bought into all of this. They're going to turn on each other. And by the way, wherever division occurs, people end up turning on each other. I mean, you could look at the political parties today. There's a lot of infighting among Republicans. There's a lot of infighting among Democrats. The only thing the Democrats sometimes can agree is they're opposed to the Republicans, and the only thing the Republicans can agree on is they're opposed to the Democrats. And if the Democrats didn't have the Republicans to be the bad boy, they wouldn't have anybody to fight. If the Republicans didn't have the Democrats to be the bad boy, they wouldn't have anybody to fight. I mean, it's crazy. But it's not. That's how Satan works, folks. It's his best work. His best work. And so God will, I hate to say it this way, he'll give them a taste of their own medicine. He's going to let the forces of division, and they're going to turn on themselves, and they're going to be the instruments of their own destruction. That's what verse 17 says. Then we get to verse 18. Okay? The woman and the great city are one and the same. People who tried to make a difference between the two, these are the same. Notice how she is described here. There is an adjective here. What is she called? Or what is the city called? She's called the great city. Why? Again, I go back to what I said last 2 Sundays. The mother city, the archetype of every evil system that has been opposed to God throughout history. That's who this city represents. Every evil manifestation that has existed, that has been opposed to God, is all caught up in this city called Babylon, the great harlot, the great prostitute. They are one and the same. Her kingdom holds sway over the powers of the earth, over the rulers of the earth, as we've just seen. Again, I go back to Augustine, 5th century, probably, put it in the most dynamic terms. There's the city of man, city of Babylon. The city of God, there's no in between. You either belong to one city or you belong to the other. You cannot have one foot in one and one in the other. You just can't. And unfortunately, there are many Christians who think that they can. You cannot. Now, there are some countries that you can be a dual citizen. I have friends that I got to know who were missionaries in Zimbabwe. It's a country that's been failing economically now for years. And the Fort brothers, 3 brothers. 2 of them ended up becoming missionaries and staying in Zimbabwe. The 3rd brother became a doctor and became a missionary doctor to South Africa, right below the border. They were born in Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe, who is the president of Zimbabwe and has been since 1980. He's really he's almost 90 now. He's held on to power all this time. He would love to evict Fort boys, but he can't. Unless they change the whole Constitution, which mess everything up. They were born there. In fact, the Fort boys, the only time they have lived, now they visited, except the oldest, Gordon now, but the only time they've lived outside of Zimbabwe was the 4 years they went to, now Amy, you're going to love this. The 4 years they went to Texas A&M, for whatever reason, I don't know, I think their father had it. All 3 of them went to Texas A&M. And the 1 year they had to go to seminary, so the International Mission Board would accept them. And they went back. They have legal citizenship. So Mugabe tried this tactic. If you're a citizen of Zimbabwe, you can no longer hold dual citizenship. And that was to get rid of all the white people. Because some people held British citizenship and some people held Zimbabwe citizenship. So here's what the 2 Fort boys did. Greg and Gordon. Guess which citizenship they gave up? They gave up their American citizenship, gave up their passport, to stay in a country where they believed God wanted them. When Gordon came back to the United States, he was asked to be the director at the International Mission Board for the East and Southern African nations, which are 16 nations. So he had to move to Richmond. He had to go through the whole process of applying for citizenship again, even though he was a citizen of the United States. Now let me ask you something. Would you give up your American citizenship to do that? That's commitment. But here's the point I'm trying to make. You're either a citizen of the city of man, which is Babylon, or the city of God. And one day, you're going to find out which one you're really a city of. Now, with the 5 minutes I have remaining, let me cover chapter 18. I'm going to do it in less than 5 minutes. Okay, here's how it's going to be done. Chapter 18 is really an extension of chapter 17, and it's anticlimactic. It breaks down this way, and that's all I'm going to do is give you an outline. Verses 1 through 3, I'm not even going to read it, is a prelude to the fall of Babylon. The great judgment is proclaimed. Then, in verses 4 through 8, we have a call to, and this is again and again appears throughout the book of Revelation, a call to separation of God's people because of the plagues that are going to come upon this city that's being judged, that's about to descend because of the crimes of this city. And Christians are called to separate before this happens. And then beginning with verse 9, continuing all the way through 19, we have a series of laments. People finally getting it and lamenting, man, we have messed up. First, in this series, in verses 9 through 10, the kings of the earth, the rulers of the earth, really, God is who he is. We went the wrong direction. Too late now. Second, the merchants who traded with this harlot city, who played footsie with this harlot city. And thirdly, the sea captains, this is in verses 18 through 20, the sea captains who got rich by taking their cargoes to the city. I'll let you interpret for yourself how many Christians are going to be in that. That they stayed in the city of Babylon and they bought into the city of Babylon because it kept them affluent. Think about it. Verse 20 also has heaven rejoicing at the destruction of this terrible harlot city that has deceived people and taken people from God. And then you have in verses 21 through 24, you have the death knell sounded for the life of the city because she has deceived the nations and because she has killed God's people. And now I'm going to give you an introduction to chapter 19 because this is where I want to pick up 2 weeks from tonight. Beginning in chapter 19, first 5 verses, you have thanksgiving for the destruction of Babylon. It's a continuation, chapter 17 and 18. A thanksgiving, this city is history. It is gone. It can no longer deceive like it once did. This great harlot is gone. So there's thanksgiving. And then in verses 6 through 10, you have the marriage supper of the Lamb, and that's where I will begin. But what I really want to get to, the marriage supper of the Lamb, is what I call the beginning of the end of the end. Because beginning with chapter 19, verse 11, we have the return of Christ in what I call the 7 last things. And we're going to take some time to talk about the 7 last things, because really everything we've studied in Revelation up to this point leads to this climax that we're going to get to beginning in chapter 19, verse 11, through the end of the chapter. What's going to happen when it all comes to an end? We're going to find out exactly what's going to happen, where people are going to fall one way or the other, and we're going to see the 7 last things in the book of Revelation. And they are a summary of everything that we've done up until now. And didn't I do real good getting through chapter 17 to 18, the first part of chapter 19? Yeah, there are some things that you could probably spend some time in. But it's going to, I really want to spend the time, beginning with chapter 19, verse 11, to talk about some really important spiritual, eternal matters with those 7 last names. They're critical for our understanding as Christians. By now, you've already figured out. Revelation is about 2 things. The deception of the beast, the faithfulness of God's people, not to fall prey to it. And heartbeat, that's what it is. And if we don't see that, then the 7 last things can be harmful. But they can be rejoiceful. Okay. Thank you all for being here. You watch the movie next week. And